dominant at that time was those who were advocating the Philippines pushing for this arbitration.
Yes.
And let's review some of the claims made by those proponents of the pursuit of this arbitration. Justice Carpio, maybe Roy Logoles, and the others, and some from UP.
The Department of Foreign Affairs.
Department of Foreign Affairs.
Secretary Del Rosario,
Del Rosario.
and Ambassador Henry Bensurto.
That's right.
Yes.
Can you help us summarize maybe 2 or 3 points that they were saying would happen with the victory if the Philippines had the victory at the arbitration?
That issue cannot be settled in 3 years. Why? It is just so complicated. I said in that monograph that if you look at other cases right here in our region, say between Singapore and Malaysia, on a simple rock where a lighthouse was located, in the International Court of Justice, it took more than 3 years to settle that issue. We have the Sipadan and Ligitan case between Indonesia and Malaysia. Again, 2 islands, but only 2 parties, took more than 3 years to resolve. So I said way back then that this is not possible to be settled in 3 years, but it was. And that is for me a cause for, some suspicions of manipulation, simply because, number one, there are 5 parties, not just 2. Number 2, these 5
parties. Who are the 5 parties for the benefit of the audience?
It is, of course, China, Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam, and a so-called political entity, which is Taiwan. So it's 6 all in all, effectively, yes.
That's right.
And with all these 6 parties, with different bases for their claims and different definitions of those geological features, how could you settle that in 3 years? Right. I thought it was impossible, but it happened.
Now we're, of course, looking at these things from hindsight, but before us witnessing the aftermath, which seems to be very different from what was promised and projected by the proponents of the arbitration. For example, that number 1, there will be so much international support for the Philippine position that China will be forced to comply, and several other things which maybe you can enumerate for us.
That the public diplomacy, so-called, the propaganda, if you wish, cites 4 things. Number 1, that when, not if, when we will win the ruling,
it's as if they were certain
we would win. They were certain that we will win. When we win the ruling, China will be shamed into compliance. So 6 months after the ruling came down, has China at all been shamed into compliance? No. Number 2, the public diplomacy then says that when the ruling comes down in favor of the Philippines and China does not comply, China will become an international outlaw.
A pariah.
A pariah state. Now the thing is, outlaw is a contraction of the phrase outside the law.
That's right.
But and the further problem there is the number 1 outlaw is in regard to the Law of the Sea Convention is in fact the United States of America, which is the one egging us to go into.
Because the U.S. did not even ratify.
Did not ratify. It's not within the. Now the third one is that when the ruling comes down, which is expected to be in favor of the Philippines, and the issue was always enforcement, the international community will join together to help to enforce the decision. What has happened? Even the foremost supporter of the Philippines, which is the United States, in fact began advocating negotiations.
That's
this
right.
was in Laos, Secretary Kerry. 5th, that when the ruling comes down, which will be expected to be in favor of the Philippines, other claimant countries will join in bringing a case against.
And of course, they were always floating the idea that Vietnam would follow suit.
Exactly, Vietnam especially. 6 months after the ruling came down, Vietnam has not said anything.
In fact, after the ruling came down, a few months later, I think 2-3 months later, Vietnam was the first to pay an official visit, a high-level official visit to China.
Yes, that's right.
Then, of course, Duterte in October.
Yes.
So, again, looking at this from hindsight, what are the lessons to be learned? 1, there are forces that tried to push us into a conflict situation.
Yes. And if I may go ahead of the story,
Yeah.
this is precisely why I think one of the reasons why President Duterte is using in very strong language independent foreign policy.
That's right.
There has been too much of interventions that has happened in the past, you know, from certain quarters.
Well, it seems also, reflecting on the past, what some people wanted to imply and inject is that if you're not belligerent against China on this issue, you're not patriotic, you're not independent, you're pro-China.
Exactly.
Don't you think so? Isn't that one of
Well,
the...
that is how it hit me.
Yeah, yeah.
I've always been advocating only Philippine interests. But sometimes Philippine interests could jibe with China or could jibe with any other country.
That's right.